The 1st of August, 1944, Warsaw, German-occupied Poland. After nearly 5 years of ruthless Nazi rule, the Polish underground resistance launches an uprising to liberate the capital. For a brief moment, hope returns to the city, but the German response is swift and merciless. Orders are issued that Warsaw must be destroyed and its population annihilated as an example to all of Europe. A few days later, Nazi leaders bring Bronislav Kaminski, commander of the collaborationist RONA unit made up of men from German-occupied Soviet territories, to help crush the uprising in Warsaw's Ochota district. Kaminski's soldiers do not behave like a disciplined army. Almost immediately, the district descends into violence as homes are broken into and terrified residents are dragged into the streets. Civilians are beaten, robbed, and shot without warning. Women are pulled from the crowds and raped, while buildings are looted and burned. Over the following days, the killings sweep through the district, leaving thousands of civilians dead. This atrocity, committed by the Nazis and their Soviet collaborators against the local civilian population, becomes known as the Ochota massacre. However, this violence will not remain unpunished, and the perpetrators will pay for their crimes with their own lives. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939 when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Warsaw officially surrendered to the Germans on the 28th of September, and in the years that followed, Poland remained under German occupation while a vast underground resistance movement developed, waiting for the moment when it could rise openly against Nazi rule. That moment came on the 1st of August 1944, when the Warsaw Uprising began. At exactly 5 p.m., known as W Hour, units of the Polish Home Army launched a coordinated surprise attack on German forces across the city. The operation had been carefully planned, with the aim of liberating Warsaw before the Soviet Red Army could enter the city and install a communist government under Moscow's control. The Polish resistance hoped to assert its own authority and secure Polish independence before the Soviets could claim credit or impose their rule. To the Nazi leadership, however, it was not just an armed rebellion. It was a final dangerous outburst of Polish defiance that had to be extinguished once and for all. Adolf Hitler issued the following order regarding the uprising. Every inhabitant must be killed. No prisoners are to be taken. Warsaw is to be razed to the ground, creating a terrifying example for all of Europe. To carry out this order, German command deployed a collection of improvised and often undisciplined units, including collaborationist formations drawn from German-occupied Soviet territories. Among them was the Waffen-Sturm-Brigade RONA, commanded by SS Brigadeführer Bronislav Kaminski. RONA was the abbreviation for the Russian Liberation People's Army, also known as the Kaminski Brigade, a formation formally incorporated into the Waffen-SS, the military branch of the SS, but lacking the discipline and structure of regular units. On the 4th of August, 1944, at around 10 a.m., about 1,700 RONA troops under Major Ivan Fralov entered Warsaw's Ochota district. Almost immediately, the operation descended into chaos. Instead of fighting the insurgents, the RONA troops, most of whom were unmarried men, began carrying out rapes, robberies, and murders, first targeting civilians on nearby Opachevska Street. Groups of soldiers stormed into people's homes and forced the residents out, some of whom were shot, especially if they refused to leave. Most of the buildings on Opachevska Street were set on fire that day after being looted. People were also killed in nearby garden plots, and the residents of 104 Grujecka Street were killed with grenades while hiding in the basement. On the 5th of August, as more and more civilians were forced from their homes, the Germans set up a makeshift camp in Ochota to hold people before sending them to a transit camp outside Warsaw. The camp was located at a former vegetable market known as Zieleniak. As residents were driven out of their homes, they were stripped of watches, jewelry, and anything of value. Witnesses later described how soldiers, eager to take rings and valuables, cut off fingers and tore earrings from people's ears, sometimes along with pieces of flesh. Anyone who resisted was often shot or beaten to death. As people were marched toward Zieleniak, RONA troops continued their attacks. Young women and girls were pulled from the crowds and raped in ruins and doorways. Some victims were shot simply because they could not keep up with the march, while others were dragged from the crowd and shot on the spot. Soldiers also fired into the crowds for amusement or threw grenades into them. By the evening of the 5th of August, between 10 and 20,000 residents of Ochota and surrounding districts had been rounded up and forced into the camp. RONA troops took over the marketplace buildings and used nearby huts as guard posts. The camp was enclosed by a brick wall, making escape impossible. Inside the camp, conditions were catastrophic. There were no toilets, no medical care, and almost no food. Occasionally, prisoners were given small amounts of moldy bread, but there was no drinking water. On the 8th of August, RONA soldiers drove several cows into the market and then shot them. In the chaos that followed, several Poles were also killed or wounded. Because lighting a fire was punishable by death, the prisoners were forced to eat the meat raw. To protect themselves from rape, women and girls smeared their faces with mud or soot, wore men's clothes, cut or disheveled their hair, pretended to be pregnant, menstruating, or disabled, or put on fake bandages, hoping not to attract the attention of their tormentors. Families also sometimes hid young women and girls under piles of clothes or blankets. They spared no one, not even little girls, old women, or women who had just given birth. Women were sometimes gang-raped by a dozen or more men. After the war, one witness described in detail the ordeal the women had to go through. He said, "Evening and night fell, lit by the fires of houses near Zieleniak. Everything was red and bloody. A hellish night began. Drunken groups of frenzied brutes trampled over people, looking for young women and girls. Then they dragged them to the wall, and there, amid inhuman screams, laughter and howling, they raped them, sometimes as many as 11 men to one girl. After that, half naked, they lay there, most often shot in the stomach or breasts." But as adults were not the only victims, some witnesses recalled RONA troops murdering newborns and babies. They strangled them or bashed their heads against the wall. Near the gate of Zieleniak, a huge pile of bodies quickly grew. Dozens more lay by the wall or along the roads leading to the market. Nobody buried them, so in the summer heat they rotted quickly. Eventually, the RONA troops ordered that the bodies be buried in shallow graves by the fence. They also burned bodies in the local high school gymnasium. In total, more than 1,000 people died at Zieleniak camp from executions, beatings, starvation, and disease. At least 300 were killed directly by RONA troops. At the same time, in another part of Ochota, similar atrocities were unfolding. On the 5th of August, German RONA troops broke into the Radium Institute, founded by Nobel Prize-winning scientist Marie Curie. After looting the hospital and robbing the staff and patients, they set fire to the library and destroyed food supplies, the pharmacy, and much of the medical equipment. At first, they intended to execute everyone inside the institute, but then changed their minds. Instead, they decided that the patients and a small number of staff would remain, while the rest were marched to the Zieleniak camp. In the evening, drunk RONA soldiers gang-raped not only the nurses who had stayed behind, but also patients, including those gravely ill with cancer. The next day, the building was set on fire, and some patients were burnt alive. About 60 people survived by hiding in the cellar and chimneys. On the 9th to 10th of August, some survivors were discovered, and the troops set the building on fire again. On the 19th of August, they dragged out the remaining survivors they could find and killed 50 critically ill patients on the spot. The rest were taken to the Zieleniak camp, where they were also executed, according to eyewitnesses, with a shot to the back of the head, and then burnt on a pyre in the gymnasium. About 170 people, patients and staff were murdered at the Radium Institute, and in total, over 10,000 people were killed during the Ochota massacre. After the war ended in May 1945, justice eventually caught up with those responsible for the crimes committed during the massacre. Hans Frank, the Governor-General of the General Government, which also included the city of Warsaw, was executed in October 1946 by American Army Sergeant John C. Woods, who botched the execution, and Frank died only after 11 minutes of horrible convulsing. Major Ivan Fralov, who led a regiment of 1,700 killers during the massacre, also faced justice. During interrogation in Moscow, he denied that his men had participated in the executions of civilians during the Warsaw Uprising and claimed to know nothing about mass executions. He justified civilian casualties by citing the use of air force and artillery during attacks on houses where insurgents were hiding. Nevertheless, he was executed in the Soviet capital on the 31st of December, 1946. Bronislav Kaminski, the leader of the Kaminski Brigade, did not survive the war. In late August 1944, he was executed by the SS, officially for looting, but likely also because his unit had become uncontrollable and had attracted widespread outrage, even among the Nazi leadership. In the final months of the war, many members of the Kaminski Brigade were killed or split up as German forces retreated west. Others were taken into custody, and those captured by Western allies were later forcibly repatriated to the Soviet Union, where many were sent to forced labor camps in the Gulag system, or executed.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.